Hello, I'm Aveline. My mother called me one night with a voice I'd never heard before, shaking, terrified. She said, "Don't come home." She'd accidentally overheard my husband on the phone, laughing, plotting. "She ends tonight, her money is mine." They were going to erase me, quietly, legally. And the worst part? It wasn't just him. My sister wanted to be in his place. My mother saw the signs and stayed silent. They made me the easy one, the blind one. But I wasn't. I watched. I listened. I documented. So now I'm asking you. What would you do if everyone you trusted was planning your end behind your back? It was early spring in Charleston, the kind where the air carries both warmth and warning, where wisteria blooms drape over garden fences like veils meant to conceal more than just shade. The garden where my wedding was held was stunning in the way old money always is, quiet, manicured, and vaguely condescending. That morning, as I stepped out of the car, my heels met the stone path with a hesitation I couldn't quite explain. Maybe I already knew. Delphine, my mother, was already there, directing vendors with the crisp tone of a woman who's hosted 100 charity luncheons and only truly enjoyed 5 N. "Aveline!" she snapped when she saw me, adjusting a stray curl behind my ear before I could react. "You're not wearing the pearl studs I set aside. The diamonds are too much for a garden wedding. We don't want to look like we're trying." Trying? I wanted to scream. I wasn't even choosing. Instead, I nodded. That had become my answer to everything lately. Nodding was easier than explaining. Nodding let people believe I was grateful. And maybe I was, just not for the reasons they thought. Delphine floated through the morning like the hostess of her own event, greeting guests she invited, arranging roses I didn't pick, in a venue I didn't choose, to marry a man I hadn't planned to love. Dorian was handsome, polished, the type of man who got nods of approval from the boardroom and the back pews alike. But he wasn't mine. Not really. He'd been introduced to me at a fundraiser, my mother's fundraiser. He showed up late, apologized like a Southern gentleman, and stayed just long enough to charm the donors and sip from a glass of wine he never finished. Later that evening, Delphine had leaned in and whispered, "He's stable. He'll put you in your place and take care of you. Take care of me." As if I hadn't been managing my own life, career, and taxes since 22. But I was tired. Tired of being the afterthought. Tired of showing up to family dinners and being seated next to the wine cooler instead of the main table. Tired of the look in Delphine's eyes every time I said no to something she considered a good match. So I said yes. By the time I stood at the altar that morning, everything had already been decided. My dress, the guest list, the readings, even the seating chart. I looked out over a sea of familiar strangers and realized my own friends weren't there. Not a single one. I hadn't even noticed until that moment, because they hadn't been invited. Instead, Delphine had packed the rows with acquaintances, business partners, donors, and people who'd once attended a brunch she hosted for breast cancer research. The ones who'd donate again if she looked pristine enough. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see her from the corner of my eye. She nodded at me, not with pride, but approval, like I was a plan coming together, a box being checked off. When the officiant began, I barely heard the words. I just watched Dorian's jaw move with each vow, watched the way his cufflink glinted in the sun like a blade. Then came the toasts, the glasses of rosé, the small bites passed around like niceties we all had to swallow. That's when it happened. Vespera. My older sister stood up suddenly, clinking her glass too hard. The chimes silenced the crowd. She wasn't scheduled to speak. I should have known. "I just want to say," she began, her voice too steady to be spontaneous, "that watching Dorian and Aveline today, well, it brought up a lot of memories." People chuckled nervously. My chest tightened. "We all know," she continued, eyes trained on the guests. Not me. I should have been the one standing next to Dorian. A gasp swept the garden like wind through wheat. Delphine didn't move. Dorian didn't blink. I stood there, frozen in tulle, while my sister stripped me of dignity in front of 87 people and 3 photographers. I smiled. It was automatic, robotic. A smile I'd practiced since I was 12. Vespera sat back down like nothing had happened. The ceremony continued. The laughter returned, though thinner now, stretched over something broken. When it came time to sign the certificate, my hand shook. Delphine leaned in and whispered, "You're lucky he picked you." Lucky. The pen hovered for half a second before I pressed down. That night, long after the last flute of champagne had been emptied and the servers had vanished with the remaining shrimp skewers, Dorian and I stood alone near the back entrance of the house. He was texting. I wasn't trying to pry, I just happened to glance as he typed. A name I didn't recognize. A message I couldn't forget. "She has no clue. You played it well. Can't wait till the house is ours." I didn't speak. I didn't scream. I didn't even breathe for a few seconds. Instead, I stored the name. That was the moment I stopped being a bride and started becoming a witness. The morning after the wedding, I woke up in a house that felt too pristine to be mine, not because it was too perfect, but because nothing inside it had my fingerprint on it. Not the furniture, not the framed photos Dorian had hung in the hallway, not even the scent in the air. It all smelled like lavender and leather, neither of which I'd ever chosen. We had returned from the honeymoon 3 days earlier, a cruise to Bermuda that I never asked for, gifted to us by one of Delphine's friends who owed her a favor. It had been less about relaxation and more like a photo op. Dorian had spent most of it glued to his phone, pacing the deck while murmuring things I wasn't meant to hear. When I asked what was wrong, he smiled and said, "Just business, sweetheart. You know how it is." No, I didn't. That morning, we hosted a brunch for the contractors and interior designer who had helped bring the house to life. That's what Dorian called it anyway. But when people clinked glasses and said, "Dorian, you did such a fantastic job with the renovation," I stayed silent. Not one person turned to me, not even a courtesy nod. And I was the one who'd written the checks. The kitchen alone had cost nearly $48,000. I remembered every invoice. I had wired the funds myself while sitting in the break room at work, eating a dry turkey sandwich. My name was on every account. But when the compliments came, they all landed squarely on Dorian's shoulders, like confetti thrown at a parade he hadn't even marched in. I didn't say anything, just smiled, nodded, the same way I had on my wedding day. Later that week, I was sorting through a pile of unopened mail on the marble island in the kitchen. Dorian had tossed most of it aside. He wasn't one for paperwork. As I filtered through catalogs, charity newsletters, and utility bills, something caught my eye. An envelope from the bank we used for our home equity line. I opened it absent-mindedly, expecting to see a routine statement, but my eyes stopped at one line. Account holder, Aveline Monroe. Underneath that, in the transaction history, was a record of a large withdrawal, one that matched the exact amount I remembered transferring for the living room renovation. My heart picked up speed. I dug deeper into the drawer and found the original agreement. My signature was there, clear as day. What wasn't there was Dorian's. It had been set up in my name only. I remembered the notary appointment. Dorian had called in sick that day and told me, "Just go ahead and sign it. We'll add me later." He never did. And yet, when I looked up a recent press release Dorian had emailed to our neighborhood listserv, there was Vespera's name. Project lead, Vespera Monroe. My sister. The same woman who stood up at my wedding and said she should have been the one next to Dorian. My money had funded a renovation that now carried her name and boosted her portfolio. I was being erased while my own blood colored in the lines with a smirk. That night, I sat in the upstairs reading nook with a mug of peppermint tea, staring at the email again. Dorian was in the other room watching TV, and I could hear his laugh, the kind of laugh that only shows up when a man knows no one is watching him too closely. I texted my mother the screenshot and followed it with a simple question. "Did you know about this?" The typing dots popped up, then stopped, then popped up again. Finally, she called. "Darling, it's not a big deal," Delphine said, her tone practiced, controlled. "It's just names. Vespera had the design background. She helped coordinate the look and feel. It made sense to credit her." Does it really matter who gets listed, as long as it's in the family? There it was again. The word family, used like a lid to a box I was supposed to crawl into and close behind me. I didn't respond, not because I agreed, but because I was tired of disagreeing with people who had no intention of listening. After we hung up, I walked through the house slowly, room by room. Everything looked beautiful, but none of it looked like me. And now I understood why. I had paid to disappear. I had invested in my own invisibility. In the bathroom mirror, I studied my reflection. The skin under my eyes was dull. My lips were chapped. I didn't recognize myself. It wasn't just marriage that had changed me. It was everything leading up to it. The countless small yeses, the sacrifices disguised as suggestions, the silence sold to me as maturity. I had become an expert at minimizing myself. At first, it was just to keep the peace. But now, I wasn't sure what peace even meant anymore. A few days later, while Dorian was at the gym, I decided to organize our office files. He'd been saying for weeks that the cabinets were a mess and full of junk, so I figured I'd help. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just making sense of the clutter. That's when I found the envelope, thick, sealed, and marked with a name I didn't recognize. Curiosity pricked at my spine. I moved toward the drawer where he usually kept his keys, only to find it empty. I tried the cabinet anyway. Locked. When Dorian returned, I mentioned the envelope casually, making sure to sound lighthearted. "Oh yeah," he said, grabbing a bottle of water from the fridge. "Just tax stuff, nothing exciting." I smiled. "Need any help with it?" He shook his head and kissed my cheek. "You've got enough on your plate, babe. Let me handle the boring stuff." That night, after he went to bed, I sat in the dim hallway outside the office and wrote a single sentence in my journal. He keeps secrets in locked places. I should too. I remember how that Sunday started, soft. The kind of morning that lulls you into believing nothing bad can happen because the sunlight is pouring in at just the right angle and the house smells like cinnamon toast and fresh coffee. Dorian was already dressed, wearing the navy jacket I bought him last Christmas. He looked polished, rehearsed, the kind of man who makes people say, "He's a catch," before they ever ask who he caught. We were headed to Delphine's annual birthday brunch. It was a tradition in the Monroe family, one of the only events that every sibling, cousin, and satellite relative showed up for. The garden was usually dressed in shades of pastel and over-embellished table settings with name cards and folded napkins shaped like swans. It was less about celebrating a woman's life and more about curating a family image worthy of Charleston society columns. On the drive there, Dorian hummed along to the radio, tapping the steering wheel like he had no care in the world. I stared out the window, feeling the unease I hadn't yet learned how to trust. By the time we arrived, the back patio was already buzzing. Vespera walked in 10 minutes late, of course, in a blush pink dress that showed off exactly the right amount of skin for a family function. Delphine was in hostess mode, gliding from table to table, complimenting outfits and offering her signature mimosa to anyone holding an empty glass. Kaylin was there too. That caught me off guard. We hadn't spoken in months. Not since I sent him a one-word text, "married," and never followed up. He nodded politely when our eyes met but didn't approach. I appreciated that. It meant he still respected me more than half the people at that table. After the first round of toasts and casual chatter, someone rang the silver bell on the side table, a signal Delphine used when she wanted to regain control of the room. A young woman stepped forward, someone I didn't recognize. She introduced herself as the Family Legacy Coordinator from a local design agency and pulled a large linen cloth off a canvas board beside her. Underneath it was a massive Monroe family tribute tree. Photos and short bios attached to gold branches, stretching from top to bottom like a family-owned version of a corporate org chart. At the top, Delphine and my father, who passed 10 years ago. Beneath them, the kids. Vespera was labeled the leader. My brother, who spent most of his adult life dodging responsibility, was the provider. Even my cousin Tara, who moved to Seattle to find herself, had a spot as the visionary. But me? I wasn't there. Not a name, not a photo, not even a blank space where I could have been. At first, I thought maybe I'd missed something. Maybe I was on the back or grouped with the grandkids for some absurd reason. I stood up, walked around the board. Nothing. My stomach twisted into a knot so tight I felt it behind my eyes. I turned to Delphine, trying to keep my voice level. Was this your idea? She blinked at me. Of course. We just wanted something visual this year. Something that shows how far we've come. I'm not on it. She smiled, like she didn't hear me right. Oh, honey, I'm sure you are. Maybe check again. I didn't move. Then Vespera, wine in hand, leaned over and said loud enough for others to hear. You've always preferred being behind the scenes, right? Like the glue, invisible but holding us together. Someone chuckled. Delphine didn't correct her. I wanted to scream, but instead, I did what I always did. I smiled. We stayed through dessert. I complimented the lemon tart. I hugged people goodbye. I thanked the caterers like nothing had happened. Because what would have been the point of saying anything? Later that evening, at home, I sat on the couch folding laundry while Dorian poured himself a drink. He stood behind the kitchen island, swirling the bourbon like a man too comfortable. You okay? He asked casually. Fine, I replied, my voice flat. He nodded, satisfied. A few minutes later, he walked over holding his phone. By the way, he said, I've been thinking. We should update our financial logins. For security, just in case. I looked up. Just in case what? Cyber stuff, phishing, hacking. These days it's crazy out there. I'll take care of it. I wanted to say no. Something in my gut clenched, but the weight of the day had already exhausted whatever resistance I had left. Sure, I said. The next morning, I couldn't log in to any of our joint accounts. My passwords were wrong. Every single one. I confronted him over breakfast. He was calm, sipping coffee. We're married now. It's ours. Do we really need separate access? I didn't answer. I simply walked away. That was the day I started writing things down. What came next wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was slow erosion. Subtle. He began screening my calls, noticing when I took too long at the store, making comments about my clothes. You're wearing that? He'd ask. Or, that color doesn't really do anything for you. Or, why would you need to text your coworker after hours? One night I found my phone notifications turned off. Just off. I hadn't done it. My screen time limits had changed too. When I asked him, he shrugged. You must have hit something by accident. Another lie. One of many. I began leaving the house more often. Excuses about errands or visiting a friend who lived 2 towns over. But mostly, I just needed air, space, distance. Then one evening, I found something that almost broke me. Junia, our housekeeper, a woman who had been in that home longer than I had, slipped a folded piece of paper into my journal. No words, just a crease down the middle. I waited until I was alone in the den before I opened it. If you ever need to know what he does when you're not home, I keep receipts. That was all it said. My breath caught. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just closed the journal and placed it back on the shelf like nothing had happened. And just like that, I knew I wasn't crazy. That Thursday night had the quiet lull of a normal weeknight. I'd just finished folding the last load of laundry, towels mostly. The house was warm, the lamps dim, and the windows open just enough to let in the hum of Charleston cicadas. I was sitting cross-legged on the living room rug, pairing socks one by one, when I heard it. Laughter. Not mine. It came from the office upstairs, a low chuckle through the air vent, followed by the muted cadence of Dorian's voice. He was on another call. Late again. I knew better than to ask who he was talking to. He always waved it off with, "Work stuff, babe." And I had stopped pressing. But that laugh didn't sound like work. Still, I told myself to focus. Focus on towels, on matching whites and folding corners just right. Focus on the things I could control. The phone rang. I almost didn't answer. It was nearly 9, and Delphine never called past sunset unless someone died. But something in me reacted before my brain did. I grabbed the phone, pressed accept. Mom? Silence. Then static. Then her voice. Shaky, frantic, unfamiliar. Don't come home. My heart paused. What? Don't drink anything. Don't eat anything. Don't come back. Do you hear me? Her voice cracked in places I didn't know her voice could crack. My mother, Delphine Monroe, Didn't panic. Not when my father died, not when the roof caved in during that hurricane, not even when I once fainted at school and she had to drive 40 minutes to pick me up barefoot from a massage table. Mom, slow down. What's going on? She took a breath like it physically hurt. I was on the phone with you earlier. I didn't hang up properly. I left the line open by accident. I heard him. I heard Dorian. Everything in me turned to static. What did you hear? She didn't wait. He said, she ends tonight. Her money is mine. He said you had no family left, that you were stressed, that he could make it look natural. He said all of it, like it was nothing, like ordering a pizza. My blood froze. The half glass of wine Dorian had poured for me sat untouched on the coffee table. I stared at it like it might lunge. I'm fine, I whispered. I haven't had anything. Good. Aveline, listen to me. You come here now, quietly, and you don't let him know I called. I can't just walk out, I said, barely able to hear myself. Then do whatever you have to. But don't stay there. I hung up. And for a full minute, I didn't move, didn't blink, just sat with my hands on my thighs, palms sweating through the cotton. Upstairs, the laugh came again. The words echoed in my head. She ends tonight. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I stood up, took the laundry basket into the bedroom as if nothing had happened, and made sure to hum quietly to myself, something tuneless, meaningless, but loud enough for Dorian to hear if he was listening. The glass of wine remained on the coffee table, untouched. I moved to the bathroom and locked the door behind me. My fingers shook as I pulled out my phone and texted. Are you home? Junia replied within seconds. Yes. Don't say anything out loud. Just get out. I stared at her message for a beat, then opened the medicine cabinet, just in case. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. Proof? A bottle that didn't belong? Nothing jumped out. Everything looked normal. But what did normal mean anymore? I flushed the toilet to keep up the charade, then turned the water on and off. I opened the door casually, walked into the bedroom, and reached for my purse. I wasn't thinking about where to go. I wasn't thinking about who I could trust beyond Junia, and now oddly enough Delphine. I was thinking about my house key. It wasn't there, not in the front pocket, not in the side, not in the inner lining where I always kept it clipped. Gone. I turned slowly, still holding the bag, and there he was. Dorian stood in the hallway just outside the doorway, leaning against the frame like he'd been there long enough to see everything. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Everything okay, sweetheart? That word again. Sweetheart. I didn't flinch. Yeah, I said, voice steady. Just needed some Advil. My head hurts. He tilted his head, still smiling. Probably dehydrated. Did you finish your wine? No, I said, shaking my head. I wasn't in the mood. His gaze lingered on me for a few seconds longer than it should have. Then he stepped into the room, brushing past me as he set his glass down on the dresser. You always do get headaches when you're stressed, he said lightly. I guess so. The distance between us was 3 feet. I could smell his cologne, oak and spice, something that used to comfort me, but now felt like smoke in a burning room. Maybe you should lie down, he said, watching me too closely. I'll bring you some water. I nodded. That sounds nice? He left the room, and I exhaled. Fast. Quiet. Delphine's words still rang in my head. The memory of him laughing while plotting my absence had embedded itself in my spine like a knife. As soon as he disappeared down the hallway, I moved fast, opened the window in the back room just enough, kicked off my shoes, and climbed out onto the back deck. The night air felt like cold steel on my skin. I didn't run. I walked, fast but careful. I reached the neighbor's gate, quietly climbed over, and made it 3 blocks before I finally called Junia. I'm out, I whispered. Her voice was calm. Come here. I've got everything ready. I hung up and kept moving, feet blistering against pavement, every step another silent promise. I wasn't going to die in that house. Not because of him, not because my family didn't believe me soon enough, and not because I'd learned to smile through the horror. By sunrise, I had stopped thinking like a wife and started calculating like a survivor. I stood at the kitchen sink, watching the water run over a single coffee mug, my hands steady in a way they hadn't been in weeks. Dorian was already downstairs, humming as he fried eggs, like the man he thought he still was, charming, loved, in control. I stepped into the room with my robe belted tight and my smile looser than usual. "Morning," he said, flipping a strip of bacon, never looking up. "Smells great," I replied, easing into the bar stool like everything was normal, because it had to be, at least for now. He slid a plate in front of me, the kind of breakfast you'd serve someone you hope to keep comfortable. "You've been so tense lately," he said casually. "Thought you could use a treat." I gave a small nod. "Thanks, I needed this," but I didn't touch the food. I let it sit there, like a trap I wasn't foolish enough to step into. As Dorian chattered about the new client he was trying to land, some investor from Atlanta, I memorized his cadence, the way his mouth curled slightly when he lied. It was always the same. When he finally left for his morning gym routine, I waited exactly 5 minutes before I grabbed my laptop, logged into my old backup email. The one he didn't know existed. There it was. A message from Kaylin. Subject: "Thought you should see this." I clicked the attachment and stared. My name, my signature, on a financial authorization form I had never signed. My stomach clenched. Kaylin's message followed. "Aveline, this came across my desk because I still handle your family's legacy accounts. Your signature looks off. Check it, and be careful." I pulled out the original form from the bank file I kept hidden in a brown envelope between 2 old cookbooks. They didn't match, not even close. The handwriting on the fraudulent document was neat, but too neat, like someone had practiced copying me but hadn't quite captured the small quirks in my pen strokes. And worse, it showed Dorian now had full access, not just to our joint assets, but to my personal accounts that had been in my name since before I met him. I sat in silence, the hum of the refrigerator suddenly louder than anything else in the room. My phone buzzed. It was Delphine. I almost didn't answer. But curiosity, or perhaps self-destruction, pushed me to swipe right. "I thought I'd come by this afternoon," she said. "To what?" "To check on you. See how you're settling in." "I know things were a bit rocky the other night." I didn't say anything. She continued. "I may have misjudged Dorian," she said, her voice thinner than usual. "I saw something in him, but maybe I was looking through the wrong lens." I waited. "I wanted to believe he was good for you," she went on. "You looked happy for once. I didn't want to be the one to ruin it." "You weren't," I said coldly. "He did that all by himself." She exhaled, long and heavy. "Let me come by. I won't stay long." An hour later, she arrived with a bag of lemon muffins and that familiar expression she wore when she wanted to seem maternal. She sat across from me in the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a teacup like she could warm herself with politeness. "I should have asked more questions," she admitted. "But I thought, maybe if you finally had someone to lean on, I wouldn't need to worry." "You didn't need to worry," I said. "You needed to listen." She didn't argue. Just nodded and looked down at her lap. By the time she left, I had no intention of forgiving her. But I wasn't going to fight with her either. I didn't have the energy. My battles were elsewhere now. That night, I sat alone in the study. I pulled out every document I had access to. Bills, policies, email records. I began scanning, saving, organizing. I created folders, labeled them with dates and subjects. Joint accounts, insurance, surveillance. I opened a new checking account in a different name. Junia had a friend who worked at a small credit union 2 counties over. No digital trail, no notifications sent to the spouse. It was a start. The next step, surveillance. Junia, ever the quiet observer, had left something for me in the cabinet beneath the guest room sink. She told me about it with a single glance earlier that week when she handed me clean towels and tapped the cabinet door with her knuckles. I waited until the house was empty before I opened it. Inside was a flash drive, small, silver, unlabeled. Back at my desk, I plugged it into my laptop. Folders appeared, dates, clips. The first video showed Dorian standing in the kitchen with a woman I didn't recognize. She was barefoot, sitting on the counter like it was hers. His hand rested on her thigh. He said it so casually I almost missed it. She won't even see it coming. I didn't watch the rest right away. I couldn't. My hands were shaking. I clicked another file. Audio only. Dorian again. If she signs the house over, we're done here. If not, there are other ways. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even whispering. It was strategy. I sat back in my chair, closed the lid of the laptop, and stared at nothing. This wasn't about heartbreak anymore. It was about survival. Let him think I was broken. Let him think I was blind. Let him smile at me over dinner and call me sweetheart. Let him underestimate me again and again, because now I had names. Now I had timelines. Now I had proof, and I knew exactly how to use it. By Saturday morning, I wore the face he expected to see. Smooth. Gracious. Slightly apologetic for my mood swings, as he had called them over breakfast the day before. I poured him orange juice with a light chuckle when he mentioned how I'd seemed distant lately. I laughed when he told a story about work that I didn't find funny. I let him touch the small of my back when we passed in the hallway and acted like it didn't burn. And Dorian? He relaxed. He thought he'd won. He made a point of putting his phone down more often that weekend, calling it rebuilding trust. He cooked dinner Saturday night and danced with me in the kitchen to some old Marvin Gaye track he queued up like a script he'd memorized. I let him spin me once, smiled, and pretended it meant something. But while he chopped vegetables, I was memorizing his patterns, what time he left for the gym, which drawer he kept his new burner phone in, how often he unlocked his briefcase near the window where Junia's cameras could catch the code. That evening, after he fell asleep on the couch with a drink in his hand and the TV still humming, I opened my laptop and checked the upload status. All the files Junia had given me were now backed up in 2 encrypted folders, one on a remote server in Switzerland, the other set to auto-send to Detective Ramira if anything ever happened to me. I was no longer surviving. I was planning. The next morning, Vespera's name popped up in my inbox with a subject line that said, "You deserve to see this." My stomach tensed before I even clicked it. Attached was a photo. A grainy shot of Dorian standing outside a hotel downtown, his arm around a woman with chestnut hair and a laugh too wide for the kind of lie they thought they were getting away with. He was leaning into her, lips just grazing her jaw. She was smiling like she owned him. I forwarded it to my burner account without opening the message. Then I called Vespera. She answered on the 3rd ring. "I knew you'd call." "Why now?" "I thought you should know." "No," I said, biting back the venom. "If you cared, you'd have told me months ago." She didn't skip a beat. "I'm not warning you, Aveline. I just wanted you to hurt." And then she hung up. It wasn't rage that settled into me. It wasn't even grief. It was clarity. I had no allies. Not in blood, not in marriage, not in memory. I was alone. And that was exactly when I became dangerous. That night, I sat on the edge of the bathtub, phone in hand, and recorded my own version of a will. "If something happens to me," I said, staring at my reflection in the mirror above the sink, "please deliver this video to Detective Ramira at the Charleston Police Department. Her contact is in my encrypted file titled Break Glass." I detailed the timeline, named every account, every suspicious transaction, every camera angle from Junia's flash drive, every time Dorian mentioned the insurance, every fake login I traced back to his IP address. I held up screenshots like evidence in a trial I didn't want to attend. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I just told the truth. After I finished, I saved the video under a simple title, If. Then I set up the auto-send function in my email client, one copy to my lawyer, another to Ramira, and a third to a friend I hadn't spoken to in years, but knew would do the right thing. The next 2 days were methodical. I withdrew small amounts of cash from different ATMs, always just under the limit that would trigger alerts. I moved valuables, jewelry, documents, USB drives, into a safe deposit box under a different name, paid in cash. I called the insurance company and removed Dorian as the beneficiary on everything that still carried my name. Quietly, no paper trail sent home. The bank teller didn't even blink. I bought a burner phone and left it in Junia's room with a single text on it, Plan B if I go dark. That Wednesday afternoon, as I sat in the den reviewing a real estate contract for a property I had no intention of buying, Dorian came in. He stood there a minute, watching me. "You've been distant," he said. I turned slowly. "I've been tired." "Let's fix that. Tomorrow night, just us. Dinner, no distractions." I raised an eyebrow. "Date night?" "Exactly." He smiled. "You can wear that black dress I like." I held his gaze. "Sounds perfect." But inside, I had already begun rehearsing the conversation I would never say out loud. "You picked the wrong woman to underestimate. You thought I would crumble, disappear, fade into the background like a rug you can walk over and never think about. But I was the floor you built your lies on." That night, after he went to sleep, I opened the safe where I kept the flash drive, checked its contents again, then shut it carefully. I didn't feel nervous anymore, just clear. The next day would be Thursday, and if the devil wanted dinner, I'd serve it on a silver tray, with poison under the napkin. By late afternoon, the house was scrubbed of any trace of uncertainty. Every surface gleamed, every candle was set in its holder, and the table had been arranged down to the placement of the dessert forks. I chose red that night, not because it was flattering, but because it made a statement. A quiet declaration of war stitched into silk. The roast was in the oven. The music was low, Nina Simone, because her voice had the kind of ache that filled silence without drawing attention to itself. The wine was already breathing. The air smelled of rosemary and something old and clean, like truth about to surface. Dorian walked through the door at 6:30 sharp. His jacket was slung over one shoulder, his smile worn like a borrowed tie, well-kept, rehearsed, soulless. "Wow," he said, scanning the table. "You went all out," I smiled. "You said you wanted a night without distractions." I listened. He came to kiss me, lips brushing my cheek a second longer than I allowed. I tilted my head just enough to keep it polite. As he poured wine into our glasses, I stepped aside and texted Junia a single word, "Now." While he took his seat, I imagined her upstairs, uploading everything. The videos of him counting out unmarked pills into small zip-top bags, him talking to someone over speakerphone, saying I was mentally unstable, clips of him rehearsing the statement he planned to give to the police. "She's been struggling for a while, officer. She wasn't herself. I told her to get help." Junia knew exactly where to send it. The email had been pre-written. All she had to do was click send, and she would. I walked back into the dining room and sat across from him, watching him sip his wine. I didn't touch mine. He raised his glass again and grinned. "To second chances." I lifted mine but didn't drink. "To clarity," I replied. We ate slowly. He complimented the food 3 times, told me I looked beautiful twice. Pretended like the last month hadn't been a silent battlefield, like I hadn't noticed the missing money, the erased messages, the way his phone was never out of reach. I let him enjoy the meal. Just before dessert, I got up, disappeared into the study for a moment, then returned with a thick envelope. I placed it beside his plate with the ease of someone handing over a bill. "What's this?" he asked, glancing down. "Legal paperwork," I said, voice soft. "Just a little clarity for the company assets. I've been thinking, it's time we made everything more official. Clean lines, no confusion later on." He opened it, skimmed the top page. "This is transferring my shares to you?" "Temporarily," I lied. "Just on paper, for a tax reason. My accountant flagged something in your name, said it could trigger an audit." His brow furrowed for a beat. Then he laughed. "God, you are so thorough," he said. "Remind me never to cross you in court." I smiled again. "You already did." He paused. "What?" I said, "I'll get dessert." He signed. Every page. I brought out tiramisu in 2 cut-glass dishes and sat back down, watching as he typed on his phone under the table. I didn't need to see what he wrote. I knew it already. "It's done." That text, like every other, would bounce through a burner, rerouted, and land in Detective Ramirez's inbox before he ever swallowed his last bite. He leaned back, satisfied. "This was nice. We should do this more often." "We should," I agreed. The knock came exactly 4 minutes later. Dorian looked up, confused. "Expecting someone?" he asked. No, I said, finishing my bite of dessert. You? He stood, wiping his hands on a napkin, opened the door. Two officers stood outside. Behind them, Detective Ramira. Her coat was still buttoned, her hands at her sides. Mr. Monroe? She asked, voice clipped. We have a few questions regarding your wife's insurance policy and your girlfriend. For the first time in weeks, Dorian looked genuinely confused. What the hell is this? Ramira stepped in. We suggest you come with us now, or we can do this with cuffs. His gaze snapped to me. What the hell did you do, Aveline? I met his eyes calmly. I cleaned the house. You set me up? I gave you enough rope. He looked at the papers on the table, the wine, the smile still lingering on my face. This isn't legal, he barked. You tricked me into signing. No, I offered you a deal. You just didn't bother to read it. Ramira nodded to one of the officers, who stepped forward. Sir, if you would, please. Dorian backed up, chest rising. You don't know what she's done. She's unstable. Ask anyone. Ask her family. Already did, Ramira said. We've seen the footage. We've read the texts. Sit down. His mouth opened, then closed. Ramira turned to me as they began the process of escorting him out. We'll be in touch, but you're safe now. Safer, I corrected. She nodded. As they walked him down the steps, Dorian turned once more, voice rough. You'll regret this, Aveline. You need me. You think this house makes you strong? I didn't flinch. You never made this house, I said. You just took up space in it. The door shut behind them, and for the first time in years, the silence in that room was mine. The hallway echoed with the sound of boots on wood as they led him out. Dorian's voice cracked through the air, part rage, part desperation. He thrashed against the truth like a man drowning who couldn't admit the water was real. You set me up, you psychotic liar! I didn't even turn my head. I just reached forward and picked up my wine glass, lifted it carefully off the table, and walked it into the kitchen with the same grace I'd used to survive every Monroe family dinner. Measured, quiet, contained. Behind me, the front door shut. Then the lock turned. And the silence that followed was deafening. But let me take you back. A few hours earlier, before the plates were cleared, before the knock on the door, before the trap closed with a click, there had been a showing. I didn't call it that, not out loud, but that's what it was. A private viewing. Just me, Delphine, and Vespera, seated in the living room, the lights dimmed. The laptop was already open on the coffee table, the flash drive inserted. I hit play. What followed wasn't loud, it didn't need to be. The first clip showed Dorian pacing in the kitchen, holding a prescription bottle he never told me he had. The second was his voice, clear and calm. She's becoming unstable. I've documented everything. When it happens, they'll believe me. Delphine said nothing. Vespera took a slow sip from her glass and stared blankly ahead, like someone trying to pretend she hadn't known parts of this. The third clip played. Dorian again, this time with the woman from the hotel. Her laugh grated through the speakers. His voice was muffled but clear enough. She'll sign it, one way or another. She trusts too easily. I didn't look at them. I let the silence swell. When the final file ended, I shut the laptop gently. No drama, no monologue. Delphine's voice broke the quiet. How long have you had this? Long enough, I said. Vespera looked over at me, her expression unreadable. And you just waited? I nodded. Timing matters. She looked like she might say something cruel, maybe even rehearsed, but then just stood and walked out. No apology, no denial, just absence. Delphine stayed seated, her fingers laced tightly, turning her ring. You should have told me, she whispered. You would have said I was exaggerating, I replied, voice soft. Like you always do. She didn't argue. Later, as dinner finished and Dorian took the last bite of the dessert he thought meant reconciliation, Detective Ramira entered with purpose. She didn't shout. She didn't make a scene. She simply said, Mr. Monroe, you're needed for questioning. Dorian blinked. Once, twice. What is this? Ramira handed him a folder. Inside, every printed document, every clip, every forged signature. This is absurd, he said, flipping through the papers. She didn't respond, just waited. I slid a second envelope across the table, the one he signed earlier that night, his power of attorney, the one he hadn't read, thinking it was a formality. Ramira took it without asking. Everything you own, everything you forged, everything you lied about, it's all here, she said. And more importantly, it's all documented. He looked at me. You tricked me, he said quietly. No, I said. You assumed I wasn't paying attention. He stood then, fast, knocking his chair back. He reached toward me, not even with force, just panic. Two officers stepped in immediately. One grabbed his arm, the other blocked his path. Don't, Ramira warned. She's lying, he yelled, pointing at me. Ask her sister, ask her mother. She's unstable. Enough, Ramira said. He sagged then, all that confidence drained out like dirty dishwater. They handcuffed him in front of the china cabinet I'd filled by myself. During those months, he couldn't be bothered. As they walked him through the foyer, he looked back over his shoulder. You'll regret this. I didn't answer. Outside, the flashing lights made our manicured lawn look like a crime scene. Neighbors peeked through curtains. A few even stepped onto porches, phones in hand. Charleston knew how to whisper, and this would be the story of the season. Delphine stood next to me, arms folded tightly. How long were you planning this? She asked. I didn't look at her when I replied. Since the first time I was erased from my own story. She said nothing more. I stepped outside, barefoot on the cool stone, and watched the cruiser pull away. Inside, the house felt different. Emptier, yes, but also cleaner, like the walls could finally breathe. I walked back into the dining room, turned off the playlist that had been looping since appetizers, and began gathering the dishes. One by one. No rush. The glass Dorian had drunk from still had a faint lip mark. I rinsed it last. There are mornings when the quiet feels earned, not awkward, not heavy, just deserved. That first one in my new apartment was exactly that. No creaking floors under someone else's weight, no passive-aggressive shuffling in the hallway, no low murmur of a man plodding behind a closed office door. Just quiet. I woke to the smell of my own coffee brewing, from my own machine, on my own countertop. I poured it into the chipped blue mug I'd kept from college. Not elegant, not matching anything else in the cupboard, but honest. I sat at the small kitchen table by the window and stared out at nothing in particular. The sun hit the buildings across the street just right, casting long gold shadows over old bricks and balconies. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I didn't feel like I was bracing for something. No email, no ring at the door, no trap waiting under a smile. That feeling didn't mean the pain had vanished. It just meant I had room to breathe inside it. The trial didn't take long to begin. Dorian was charged with multiple counts of fraud, attempted insurance manipulation, and conspiracy to commit a felony. His lawyer tried to paint it as a domestic misunderstanding, gone too far, but the video footage crushed that narrative in less than 5 minutes. The woman he'd been seeing, who he once called just a colleague, cut a deal. She flipped on him the moment charges hit her inbox. Cooperation in exchange for immunity. I should have been angry, but I wasn't. She gave me what I needed, even if it came from self-preservation rather than remorse. Vespera deleted all her social media the week the news broke. Vanished from the Charleston dinner circuit. No brunch selfies, no passive posts about healing journeys. Just silence. I heard from a mutual friend she went to Arizona, or maybe Asheville. I didn't ask for more details. Delphine showed up at my door 2 weeks after the arrest. I didn't invite her in, but I didn't slam the door either. We stood in the hallway of my building, the hum of a neighbor's washing machine buzzing behind us. She was holding a pie, blueberry, store-bought, still in the plastic. The kind of gesture you make when you don't know what to say but feel like showing up counts for something. I should have protected you better, she said. I didn't respond. She swallowed. I kept thinking I raised you to be strong enough to handle whatever came your way, but that's not the same as being safe, and I confused the two. I leaned against the doorframe. You didn't throw me to wolves. You just watched me walk toward them and didn't yell. Her eyes glossed over. Do you hate me? I shook my head. No, but I don't need you to apologize again. I need you to change. She nodded, eyes low. I'm working on that. I let her leave with the pie still in her hands. A few days later, I started a volunteer position at a nonprofit that helps women navigate financial independence, especially those exiting abusive or controlling relationships. I teach a basic budgeting class twice a week. Nothing dramatic, no podium, just a circle of chairs, women in different stages of rebuilding, and a whiteboard with markers that don't always work. The first time I stood in front of them, I felt like an imposter, but then I saw one of them holding her phone the same way I used to, tight, guarded, like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to have it, and I knew I was exactly where I needed to be. One Thursday afternoon, Detective Ramirez stopped by the office. She handed me a plain cardboard box and said, "Figured you might want this back." Inside, the flash drives, my handwritten notes, a few printouts from Dorian's burner phone, and the red dress I wore the night he signed everything away. I cleaned the files off the drives, she said. Kept a copy in evidence, of course, but these are yours now. I looked at the dress. For a moment, it didn't look like clothing. It looked like armor, heavy with history. In case you ever want to remember what surviving looks like, she said, before walking out. I didn't open the box again for a long time. Some weeks later, I drove past the old family estate. I hadn't been back since the night of the reveal. Since I stood in front of the people who raised me, loved me the way they understood love, and allowed them to sit in the silence I refused to break for them anymore. I didn't go inside, just stood by the gate. The air was thick with magnolia and memory. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a single bloom, white, crisp, fragile. I laid it at the gatepost. No dramatic goodbye, no speech, just a moment, a closing. When I returned home that evening, I pulled out my journal, the same one I used to record everything, my doubts, my plans, my fears. I opened it to a fresh page. They tried to steal my life, but they forgot. It was never for sale, and I didn't need applause when I finally walked out of that burning house. I just needed the strength to keep walking. Sometimes survival isn't loud. It's quiet, strategic, and invisible, until it no longer has to be. This story wasn't just about betrayal or revenge. It was about reclaiming a voice that had been silenced for too long. Have you ever felt like the one person everyone counted out until you proved them wrong? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your story. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful family stories like this one.